All right. Good morning, or good afternoon again, everyone. My name is Sasha Tolkova. I'm a marketing manager for Witham. We're one of the three companies representing ourselves here today. We'll be talking about key takeaways from the SharePoint conference that happened last week in Las Vegas. And just a couple of housekeeping items. We are recording the webinar, so if you missed anything, no worries. We'll provide a link to the recording at the end of today. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please don't hold back. You can submit your questions in the questions pane of the GoToWebinar. We'll try to get to everything at the end. If we can't, we'll certainly try to address them by email or maybe even a follow-up blog post or something like that. And with me today, I have three presenters. I have Adam Levithan from Witham. I have Mark Cashman from Microsoft and Dave Barnett from Quest. And I'll let them introduce themselves. And I hope you guys enjoy.
As always, Sasha, thank you so much. Alphabetically, third name down if you go to the SharePoint conference website. Thank you. My mother named me well for being a speaker at conferences. I am a product manager of Witham's One Window Workplace, and we will talk about intranets later, so I'm really excited. I didn't have a fun fact like the next two people do, but fun fact, I like to bicycle, and every year in August I ride something called the Pan Mass Challenge, which is 200 miles over 2 days. So that's what I do. So let's go to Mr. Mark. Introduce yourself.
Yes, hello, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today, and certainly your interest in SharePoint and all things integrated and alongside it in Microsoft 365. I'm on the SharePoint marketing team, and I've been focused on SharePoint Online for about 10 years, and just recently focusing on the OneDrive for Business all up. That's both consumer and business. And a lot of what I own now for SharePoint is how we integrate with Microsoft Teams and support teamwork all up. But of the 13 years that I've been working at Microsoft, my fun fact is 10 of those have been focused on the SharePoint business. So if you want to know SharePoint history, I've got a little bit. If you want to know pretty much all across the board, what we announced at the SharePoint conference and all that good stuff, you've come to the right place.
That sounds like a whole nother webinar, Mark. Maybe we'll have to do that. SharePoint history, dun, 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 the Wayback Machine. Okay. And last but not least, Dave.
Yep, thanks, Adam. So I'm happy to join these two esteemed colleagues here. My name is Dave Barnett. I'm a product manager at Quest Software, specializing in management and migration tools for SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams. I've got about 7 years working in SharePoint governance and migration, with focus on sort of easy user experience and making sure that the management scenarios are as smooth as possible. Fun fact though, certified Yammer administrator, a couple forays into Yammer administration software. And then I once was a Geek Squad agent, which is a fun part of my life.
Fantastic. I have to look into the annals of SharePoint webinars, and the odds that we actually have 3 product managers on a webinar at the same time. We've left out devs and we've left out IT pros, but I think we know enough about each area to discuss it. And actually, speaking of that, a word from the sponsor really quickly, Witham Digital. And as you know, Dave is representing Quest. We are a wonderful partner of Microsoft. Actually, I should make Mark scroll over to the section of the virtual summit that has us as an intranet partner on the screen. But we've done a lot of migrations and deployments all across the SharePoint and Office 365. And you can see the screen, and I'll just keep on going on. So enough about us. What we want to hear about you. So we're just going to ask a few quick poll questions. And first is, what is your role at your organization? Overgeneralized, developer, mostly IT manager, IT pro, content owner, other. I guess usually we should do all of the above, the famous SharePoint unicorn that's asked to wear so many hats here. We'll wait about 10 more seconds here. Thank you for everyone. Got a lot of IT manager or IT pros here. And fantastic. Okay, so we'll close that. So 50% of the attendees. Oh man, 30% of the attendees were other. So if you feel like it during the webinar, if you can put into the chat what you are, so we know next time to ask the right question, that would be great. And then now gives us some idea about our talking points. Where are you currently? Fully in Office 365. And just for the record, Mark did not ask us to do this one. It's just a question we always are interested in, and see how it changes over time. Also, with digital is based out of Washington, D.C., or just the outskirts. So we get a lot of people who are the last one, which is on premises. But luckily for Mark, and yes, I've known him almost all of those 10 years, right, Mark? I can pick on him a little bit. 48% are fully on Office 365. So pretty cool stuff here. All right.
We call that progress.
Progress. 28% are hybrid, and then 24% are on premises and looking to the cloud. And then the last one, we're really curious to find out if you attended the conference itself, or if you watched the virtual summit. Oh, that was so quick. Neither was the number one. Now it's being competed a little bit with watched online, and not too surprised that not too many people who have attended. So we'll wait another second here. So vast majority of people, 72%, coming in as neither. Let's call the whole thing off. 20% watched online, and 8% attended. So cool. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Really appreciate it. All right, so now into the juice. So luckily we do have Mark here, and we have 5 questions. And at the very end, we'll be sharing some resources with you, but we're going to start in a few sections. So the first one is the SharePoint roadmap, and luckily for us, Mark has the goods.
Yeah, so I went and scoured through all of the SharePoint Conference 2019 presentations, the primary ones that we had on the early part of the sessions. And these are all the roadmap slides from SharePoint across what you can do with team sites and lists, employee engagement, if you think about the modern intranet, and all the things down through admin, developer, and then we move into OneDrive, Search, Stream, Yammer, and Kaizala. So I'm going to click through a few of these and highlight just a couple of things. These will also be shared out, not exactly today, but soon, just as a read-only as presented object, and we'll put that out through the SharePoint Twitter handle. But if you can see my screen just to validate what I'm talking through, we'll go through, and Dave and Adam, feel free to jump in if there's anything that catches your eye you wanted to talk about. But remember, these are as presented at the SharePoint conference, May 21st to the 23rd, and I'll click through all of these different slides just to give you a sense of the amount of disclosures that we made, and of course, a reminder of things that we've talked about and when they're going to come. So first up is SharePoint team sites and business applications in the way that we're integrating with Power Apps and Flow. A lot of work here focused on what we're doing with lists to make it easier to create them, a list from a list or a list from Excel. And then once you've got your list going, how you can leverage the different column type, formatting, bound it to Flow and Power Apps, and of course, easier to work with in terms of the better, improved, modern, quick edit. And on the right-hand side, we talked about some of the things that we're thinking about in 2019, and certainly don't yet have a full date, but have gotten this based on feedback, and here are the things that we're focused on. I'll pause for a minute. Adam, Dave, anything here that you wanted to comment on before I click through?
For me, it's the new files experience in Teams and OneDrive. I've had many a discussion with our other MVP, Melissa Hubbard, who you presented with, Mark, on coming through the internet versus coming through Teams, and I think this really covers a lot of my, well, I'll talk my old SharePoint ways. So I'm really excited for the full document experience to be everywhere.
Yeah,
I know. Oh, good.
I was just going to say it's just something we've talked about for a little bit. Confident this will be landing within several weeks, but definitely one of those things that beyond Teams and OneDrive, we want everybody to think about when they're working with their files, when they're working with the rich experience of a document library, no matter what their entry point is, whether it's OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams, or Outlook, where there's a files experience, we want that to be the files experience, not a different file experience. So it's definitely a common control that we're enabling through those different entry points.
I just wanted to add too, I know a theme across a lot of the new features that we're rolling out was this emphasis on this kind of responsive layout and full screen experience for users kind of regardless of the device they're on. And I think that's something that across the board, they'll probably pop up in a few more categories as well that we're excited and seem like a great focus throughout the conference.
Yeah, I agree with you. I actually think SharePoint lists in all their glory, because that is a similar control that looks great in Microsoft Teams. When you put it in Teams and go full screen, you really get rid of all the Chrome and just focus on the list. And it's something that that they're considering across the different places where you might view a list or a library, or they already do it across everything you can do in Teams. You just hit the little 2 expanding arrows, to go full screen, and it really clears out the way to just focus on your content. So definitely a good catch, Dave, and something the team is looking at. So moving on, the next level is just a different level of detail specific to lists and libraries. So you get a greater sense of where we're at, where we're headed, and some of the things that are top of mind. This one's fairly similar, but just a little bit more depth and detail. To the next one is all we're doing around SharePoint employee engagement. So think about your modern intranet growing, maturing. We've introduced communication sites and hub sites and site designs, making it easier to create pages, use web parts, pull in images, that are already approved across the organization. The big thing that we announced and will certainly show here in a second are the new SharePoint home sites and what they do to up-level, what you can do for your intranet at the most parent level, but have it be driven as a personalized, dynamic experience, in addition to retrograde of being able to up-level what your modern root site looks like. So if you go to your customername.sharepoint.com, the base level root, you can now make that a communication site. You can up-level it to become a home site or even to be a hub site. So there's a lot certainly that we've invested in the last year or two, and you can see that the team is still heads down delivering on a lot of new innovative stuff to make sure you can bring your entire intranet to the cloud. Dave, Adam, any thoughts on anything home sites or other?
Yeah, I mean, home sites is probably one of the biggest features that was discussed this year. I think that there's probably some more we can focus on as we work through the rest of the slides this year. But I know that gives a ton of focus and clarity around how organizations can start to think about reorganization of their content for the longer term in SharePoint Online. And I think it gives a lot of good direction for folks moving away from just like copying what they once had on premise. So I like the early mention of home sites, but I'm sure we'll be visiting that a bunch.
Yeah. We'll definitely see them, and you guys can make any notes of the actual features that you see as I scroll through.
And I think there's way too much to talk about, so I'm not going to go pinpoint. But I think because we do have 3 product managers on here, I like to point out the great thing about being an MVP and visiting Microsoft is learning how much goes into every single one of these bullets. So while top of mind has 3 3 bullets in it, branding update, do you know how huge that is? How pages display and what can go into it. And I remember talking to a few people just about the section background colors, and that a web part had to be totally rebuilt just to be able to handle a section background color. So just in context, as people are seeing this, and then Mark will give you a link where the information will be posted later, and you can see some on my Twitter feed, as I call them gratuitous roadmap slides, is like how much work goes into any one of these things. It's not as quote unquote, and Dave's going to laugh, as easy when he's working on a Quest product or I'm working on ours, where we control everything. When a Microsoft team works on a solution, they then have to integrate with all of the other organizations and then integrate with Office 365 and Microsoft 365. So it's just a huge level of effort on anything, no matter how trivial it might seem on a slide.
Yeah, I certainly can support that thinking and the reality behind it. One last thing I wanted to note on this slide is with ghost authoring. Very exciting. Just yesterday, we locked the contract with Casper. So Casper is now signing on to do some ghost authoring for us. And moving on, just a little humor there for everybody. So next up was really just next level of detail across employee engagement. When you get down to the details of modern pages, web parts, and news, there's a number of different authoring experiences that the team is working on. Multilingual is certainly a big one around how you publish your content across a multi-geo or a very vast and varied employee base. And again, you'll see a couple of duplications here as these were presented across a couple of sessions owned by the same team. But really exciting here is a lot of the new web parts. If you think about some of the simple web parts that really are primary to a broad company portal, you think of things like the weather widget, the time clock for multiple time zones, the calls to action, the things that you want to list and have be not just static information, but pretty dynamic experiences as people log in from different locations across the world. They're really putting some nice thinking into the web parts. Of course, it just advances what we're doing for the modern internet because you can use most of this pretty much anywhere, on team sites, on communication sites, on hub sites, on the home site. And of course, think of these all as configurable. These are just really great starting points for you to then take over and primarily configure versus customization. But it's all available to be customized as well if you create a custom web part or a custom theme or want to adhere to a custom header or footer. Lots to do to control on the page, a lot of value to not have to build it yourself year over year as we've been delivering. I'm going to just, for sake of time, move through because I know that one was pretty similar in topic. There's a lot we're doing from the admin center perspective. I'm going to show you a couple of things here specific to site rename and some of the ways that you can bulk take action across multiple site collections. There's a lot of things that we're doing to make it easier for admins. There's a lot of things we're doing, obviously, to make it a safer and more secure place so that you can clearly label, but those labels obviously have policies that are behind them. And some of the things that we know that are legacy, classic experiences, people have been wanting to move all experiences to modern, not just team sites, not just lists and libraries, but really to move into a more pervasive modern intranet, even for those things that have been in place in Classic for a while. But one big one here, if you didn't catch it in the announcements, is that bringing together of the OneDrive and the SharePoint admin experiences to make it easier as you're delegated, most likely often one person or a group of people to manage SharePoint and OneDrive in the mix of Microsoft 365. We want to give you one place to go, not have to have you bounce around across multiple admin centers. Any thoughts for IT pros, admins?
Well, luckily no more static picture that, of course, was beautiful on the OneDrive homepage, but pretty funny. Actually, a question, two questions now. One, going back for a second off of admin, I should have done it in the next order, but I'll do it this way, which is you talked about the experiences across Office 365, and someone is asking if the quick edit will be inside of Teams also.
Yes, it is something that's in the planned feature set. The interesting thing, at least as far as you think about the phases of the rollout and the maturing of the full control, it's actually a new control. So they're building it not just for SharePoint as a new control using the React framework, but they're actually building it so that then it becomes, over time, the same control. So as Microsoft Teams, as OneDrive, as SharePoint, and for some things like files and the files experience through Outlook, as they start to adhere throughout production, that new control. And if you think about the question is specific to the list control, it is to be the same control. And the maturity of it is as we move into these different new user experiences. So if you view a list from Teams, on day one, when they take up that new control, you'll get the benefits pretty much about 80% of just what you can do in lists, you can do in Microsoft Teams. And the quick edit one is relatively new and obviously built for that value of being able to do and work with your list no matter where you're working from. So the answer is yes. The task at hand is I want to go in and more quickly edit my list. If I'm doing that from Teams or SharePoint, we don't want you to have to turn to a different tool than where you're already working to get the value of what you're trying to accomplish. So it's certainly a great question. It's something that you will see in practice over time. These lists, no matter where you're experiencing them from, will have the full power of what you can do with lists, including over time things like creating a flow off of a row item, or creating a view, doing the in-place search, looking up information, everything you can do. The idea is to get the full power of SharePoint into those different endpoints beyond SharePoint itself.
Great. Dave, any closing remarks on SharePoint et al. Roadmap?
Yeah, for the Admin Center, I think I just want to reemphasize, especially for folks that are maybe looking at Office 365 for the first time, the classification labels is a feature that I think continues to mature. We've seen, a lot of our experiences with enterprises and larger organizations that have been trying to make this shift have been looking for, some of these gaps that existed from on-premise Office 365, and labels is sort of a new feature. And it seems like with every month that passes, we get more capability, more ways that we can leverage this in governance and security. And so I don't think that should slide under the under notice, because I think each kind of conference that we go to, we see more and more development coming in under labels, specifically around sort of security. So I'd love to see that push.
I 100% agree with you, Dave. And to put a little bit of context on the team behind it, there's an entire team that's dedicated. We call them the Information Protection Team, or the IP team. And it is a team specifically from SharePoint, but it spans across a broader set that's actually looking across Microsoft 365, from the desktop to the service to everything in between, and of course all of those feature sets to apply to different content types. So Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, content, sites, pages, a lot of things that people want to wrap in some level of awareness or security. Labels. As simple as a term as it is, it's got a lot of power behind it, with a lot of configuration and customization to what it means when you label something as X or Y. So I agree with you, and it is a big team across the engineering teams, with a lot of investment for now and going forward. All right, so moving off of admin, if you're a developer, this next one is straight from Vesa Juvonen, who did a developer keynote. This is purely a summary. I hope you take your time. Once that gets posted, if you're a developer or interested in what's possible, they did a really nice developer keynote right after Jeff Teeper's keynote. And so I won't be able to do this justice, because I really am very thin on what it means to be a developer. But certainly the team has been putting a lot of effort into what you can do with the SharePoint framework. It is how we're building the product. It's how the web parts are built, the pages are built, the sites themselves, leveraging a lot of open web standards, so you don't have to have a PhD in SharePoint development anymore. It's very open for people that understand web standards to be able to use the same tooling, the same languages. And of course, we've got a lot of documentation and guidance to get you from where your understanding is today of SharePoint development into this modern era. We're working with a lot of our partners so that they can improve their tooling based on where we're going. And it's not by nature of that they need to learn how to improve their tools. It's just the guidance of where we're headed. And if we all play in the same sandbox, which has a lot of rich capabilities, not to use the old term sandbox, but the place where if you build and develop your solutions in this way, either as a partner or as an individual business, on top of the SharePoint framework, with a lot of the common patterns and practices that are promoted through this dev community, there's a lot of opportunity to extend in a safe way as we move forward on a lot of these rich feature sets and grow them over time. Your custom solutions will ride on top in a way where it feels safe, secure. The life cycle and management of it won't feel like a headache or things getting broken. But I'll let you digest here, Adam or Dave, if you've got anything specific, if you've got a bit of a depth in this area or anything that rang true for you. All I know is the second bullet in the top of mind is something that's going to be really exciting for collaboration going forward. The fluid framework is something that is, of course, built on top of SharePoint from a content perspective, but it is also something that will be extended to developers to be able to create these rich solutions of being able to pull parts and pieces that are rich and dynamic and expose them in new places as rich experiences, from a content collaboration or an information exposure perspective. Really, really exciting.
Yeah, I think I'd agree right out of the gate. That second bullet for me was something that just felt like a moment where Teams is shifting from a platform delivering sort of a canned experience into something that all of a sudden became this open platform, almost like SharePoint has kind of been for us for a long period of time. So I definitely think that can't be understated. Yeah, the changes there are excellent.
I agree. And the big value is there's a lot that you can do with the SharePoint framework to bring elements into Teams. There's also a lot of work to bring Teams elements that are already there, the investments you either have from Microsoft or third party or yourself to build out those connectors and new tab experiences. You can also bring those into SharePoint as full page apps. So there's a lot of work between the teams to unify across, from a developer's perspective, the developer framework, not just the SharePoint framework, but the ways that you develop and pattern your solutions. And there's a ton of guidance on how to do that, in addition to the lower level components that talk to each other. So if you think about a tab or a web part or a web part to web part, a lot of those integrations are much more possible with the intent that it's just a tab in Teams that you turn to, and it can be a very customized experience on a SharePoint page or pulling in from lots of different rich resources.
I have nothing to add.
Okay, so moving on to OneDrive, this is sort of new and near and dear to my heart. I actually got to own creating this slide with the engineering team sign off. It really is their slide. I just got to make sure that we had everything accounted for. There's a lot of work that the OneDrive team is doing to make the end user experience when they're on web, mobile, sharing, or sync, to have that be, a industry leading experience with the capabilities, with the robust nature of what you can do. And certainly the things that are top of mind are to address the things that people have been asking for when they roll it out and deploy it at scale to an enterprise, whether you're a small business, medium size, or of course up to enterprise. Even our largest customers, who are several 100,000 users, are benefiting from OneDrive, and they're seeing the ease of deployment. Certainly it's a project. I don't want to say, you do it overnight, but relatively within a number of weeks, you can get off of file servers, you can move into OneDrive, you can move off of a competitor if you've kind of been splitting your deployment across different vendors from a collaborative perspective. But once you're in, you'll see that we've been enhancing the experience, bringing it so that you have visibility on what types of files you're looking at with the previewers, the ability when you share to choose how you share with the different links that you can create, and that you can do that and now more easily manage it when you do share out those links. We want you to keep your content in place or move it effectively when it moves in the life cycle of the content, but to then more easily see what are other people working on around me, these recommended views, popular around me, the ability to then, if you find something of interest, to save it for later and have that be an easy way to then get back to things that were of interest or you couldn't spend time on. And from a sync perspective, the big announcement, the last one that I'll note here, is differential sync. This is actually something that we've had for Office files by nature of we've tracked the delta changes, and when things sync, if I add a slide or make a change to a cell, we only change that delta. And if you actually see differential sync working, you would see that it's just changing, let's say, of a 10 meg file, I add a slide and it would just upload that, maybe 300 or 400K change. And it actually in parentheses tells you what's changed, and it works really fast, much faster obviously than syncing the entire file over again. And of course that it saves on the network and your bandwidth constraints. The last thing on differential sync is the big point of clarity I got just by answering questions and learning how we presented it and what were the main questions. Today, like I mentioned, we do support this already for Office files. Differential sync, when we land this later this year, will be available for all files. So PDFs, videos, DWG files, if you're working with AutoCAD drawings, whatever it is, if you've made a change to it, we don't resync the entire file. We will only sync the Delta changes.
So Mark, I don't know if you know it, but you just made Dave smile really big because he is the product manager of the Quest Replicator product that uses differential sync. So it's something that he knows like the back of his hand. I think for OneDrive, I love giving my presentation. It's almost been the same structure of presentation for the last 4 years, but now it's not a question of if you should move. 4 years ago, there's questions, but now, move into it, and all of the items here are, polishing off the great solution, and I really like the external sharing reports. It really shows that the Microsoft team is listening to not only what people close to Microsoft are saying, but on user voice, and I'm sure the IT pros would raise their hand here, that it's great and all that it works, but how well is it working, and how much intellectual property are we letting slip through? So that's a really big, important part for me in all of this great work that's being done.
Cool. Dave, are you a OneDrive user? And I know you're focused on differential sync, but just as an end user, what's your experience?
Oh yeah, no, I've been fully invested in OneDrive for quite a while. I think for me, the most exciting piece that I got out of the conference here and the roadmap was basically that there's a broad expansion of sort of easier contextual sharing from OneDrive, where users are sort of being made aware that they're giving permission to files that they manage or that they own as they're sort of passing that data out. And then the contextual side of this being that, we're seeing access being delivered from within the file itself while you're working on it in Word or PowerPoint, all the way to delivering it through the traditional services. So that I think is excellent. Users sometimes share thinking they're just emailing a copy, but I think the emphasis on ensuring that they understand this is giving access to something they own is excellent as well.
Yeah, and all the choices that they have, whether they want somebody to be able to edit or just view only, if they want to expire the link, if they want to put a password on it, if they want to block download. There's a lot of things when you go to share. The value of keeping the file in the same location, of course, has ramifications so that you don't have duplications or version control issues. But then once you share it, especially even for me when I share out these slides publicly, if there's something that needs to change or I want to modify something or make it clearer, I can do that to the original file, even off of that sharing link. And of course, that particular sharing link, that one, if I share this deck, will be live to the public, view only. And I certainly want to manage that and maybe expire it, in about 3 or 4 months by nature of the up-to-date nature of it. And then we'll have another, set of information coming at Ignite later this year. And I can control that based on what do I want that link to do, what do I want people's experiences to be when they arrive at that file. And then, of course, because I still own the file, I haven't put it in some weird random place or given it to another entity if I don't need to. I can fully control what's on that file whenever people click into that link. The last thing I wanted to mention here is a couple of things on top of mind. We're definitely looking at and taking feedback on what's the right file size. Currently today our limit is 15 gigs. We want to be very competitive in this space, not just for OneDrive all up, but for when you think of what types of files can I bring to the cloud and what sizes. And then the other thing is across June and July, you'll hear a number of things coming from Microsoft that are specific to OneDrive Consumer. And we really just want to push that value. If you're using OneDrive for both business and life, that there's a lot of value in the app experience, the sync experience. Of course, the capabilities are becoming rich across both of them, so you really have a common experience. But we're really going to push a little bit on the dual use value of OneDrive when you move from working with your work files that are protected in the way that work wants them to be protected, and then of course to move to your personal life balanced files, and of course managing those in a very separate way, but accessing them as an individual across your work and life is something that we're wanting to make sure is of great value and easy to do. The next slide is a little bit more around the specific sync investments that we're making. So again, a little bit of duplication and reminder of the value of the desktop sync client, so OneDrive.exe. So there's certainly a lot of information around how to deploy, how to use. Obviously, if you're on premises, online, there's a lot of value in even having still Groove.exe for older versions of SharePoint and syncing. But the real value here is what are we doing with OneDrive.exe and the capabilities that it entails of moving off of Windows 7 to Windows 10. We've got a great story for moving to Windows 10 intact while moving all of your desktop and getting more compliant with your files backed up and protected in the cloud. And then, of course, all the advantages of what you can then do on a file that's stored in OneDrive versus what you can do with a file that's stored in a file server. It's very limiting in the capabilities perspective. So collaboration, co-authoring, the ease of sharing that we were just mentioning, share by link, all those advantages once you're in the cloud get great, become a really great collaborative tool. But I'll not pause here for too long because some of this was already on the previous slide, but just know there's a great team behind developing and expanding what the sync client can do, and they're very, very interested in feedback and working on being very, very competitive in this space. Couple more slides and then we'll move to a different topic. But if you're interested in what we announced at Build, we released in general availability what we call Microsoft Search, and you'll see this show up everywhere. And that's the whole point, is no matter where you're at in Microsoft 365, even coming soon to the desktop experience when you're on a Windows machine and you're in your Windows Start experience, you can search for files throughout Office 365, throughout your desktop, wherever you're coming from. But if you're in the service, if you're in the SharePoint home site, if you're in OneDrive, if you're in Teams, there's a universal search experience, or sometimes scope to the app you're in, but you can always up-level it to do an enterprise-wide search. So there's a lot of different entry points, a lot of focus on the in-app experience. So if you're using Office, Word, PowerPoint, Excel, you have a great experience to find content and actually repurpose it right within the application. But at this time, you can see there's a lot of things that are onboarding so that when you go to do a search, you'll see things coming from Yammer, from SharePoint, from Exchange, coming soon, things coming from Microsoft Stream, so videos, and of course everything you do in OneDrive, SharePoint, Calendar, and all that information drives a really rich, personalized experience that we drive through what we call the Microsoft Graph. But the value to the end users, when you do a search in Microsoft 365, with Microsoft Search, it's a great, dynamic, personalized experience because the service is essentially tracking who you work with, what you work on, what your interests are, groups that you belong to. And again, it's not a weird big brother. There's no permissions that are going to get broken because anything that's sensitive or private won't get exposed through a broader search. But as you go looking for things, we hope you start to discover different people, different sites, different conversations that are happening. So there's a lot that Microsoft Search will bring together. And if this is an area of interest, there's a great blog specifically on Microsoft Search that was released at the build timeframe, and I can point you to that. Any thoughts on Search, Adam, Dave?
Well, that was going to be a whole topic in and of itself, but you've done such a great job with Roadmap. I think from a practical perspective, it is here, and it's already rolling out in tenants. And so that means some of the search behavior is going to change for our clients. And that's something that, especially when I'm focused on intranets, you have to consider. You have to consider if you had a custom result source. Now, it was announced that they're working on, I'll jokingly call it parity, but really the features that we're used to using in SharePoint. But it really is amazing that this search box will be everywhere in every Office product and it will be contextual. And that's awesome. It's just when I'm zoned in on that intranet experience, and if you are too in the audience, you have to think through how it's going to be introduced, what your education is going to be as the technology rapidly changes. And it is, from seeing it behind the scenes, it is growing up really, really, really quickly. So it's a very exciting feature to be coming.
I think for me, something that I was most impressed with is we tend to, especially since we've made a jump to Teams for most of our meetings, it's gotten very easy to record a lot of internal calls, and whether it's webinar or just internal team discussions. And the ability to have content that we host in stream be parsed by search down to the point where our results will be even flagged based on what the conversation was throughout the actual meeting. That is sort of an invaluable addition, because we have all this content that's now being captured, but it's very hard to kind of make any use of that if we've just got, you know, hour-long meetings that are saved on and off. But if we can jump right into the moment in that recording where there's relevant data, this is sort of the first moment where I've seen something like stream be almost like business critical for an organization.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, the what's possible today is the entire video, whether it's of a team meeting or you upload a 5-minute discussion or a polished video from a broader all hands, whatever. What gets created is an automatic transcription of the entire video. So in the stream experience today, you can do an in-video search based on that transcript, and you can edit it and you can bring your own caption file if you'd like. But I think what Dave is really hitting on is once this becomes available to the broader search engine outside of Stream, you'll be able to do these really rich searches to find based on not just the title or the description that somebody hard-coded into what they present as the video on the video playback page, but throughout the entire video, the entire transcript will be available to the search engine. And Dave is right, not only to find the video, but to actually get you right to that point in the video is a big thing that the team is looking at.
So I think
go ahead.
Well, I think you have Stream and Kaizawa, and then I'd like to switch real quick.
Yeah, so we were just talking about Stream, Dave. Really, I think the highlights here are the value of what you can do when you're mobile. So you can record and upload a video while you're on the go through the Stream mobile app, and that's for iOS and Android. The other thing that we've talked about for a little bit, but it actually is just starting to land, if you think about a video that you then want to pause and throw up a poll or a survey, you can now build out that experience in Microsoft Forms and then embed it as at 5 minutes in, apply this form, let the audience fill it out. Once they're done, then the video continues. So it's a really great on-demand learning tool for people who are wanting to make their videos a lot more interactive, similar to how we started out the discussion today, just a few questions about the audience and then onto the video. There's a lot that they're doing certainly to target this year to make it so that it's a lot easier to work with Stream videos, within Stream, to bring them into PowerPoint, the way that you work with channels and groups, and a lot of things that you can do to actually augment the video when it's already in the system. Some really nice things coming there. And the big one that we've been talking about for a while that they actually have now landed as an official item for this year is the external video sharing that will really complement what a guest or an invited person outside of your company can consume that's based on your tenant, your assets provided to them. Similar to a site and a document, you can now share a video and they'll have that same control to be able to share it, but then revoke if needed, so that you can keep your asset in place where you have control of the policies and how it's shared and what can be done to it, and that can now include a video. But for sake of time, the last thing, Yammer and Kaizawa. Yammer is making a big motion around Q&A, so the experience of when you ask a specific question, you get an answer. Not only can you have a nice formatted experience for Q&A in the way that people ask questions and answer them, but you can also mark an answer as the right answer, so that if somebody's already provided an answer, you can see right at the top that the answer has been marked as the right answer. But there's definitely ways you can build Yammer into the modern intranet experience for great corporate communications that are two-way engagement, for knowledge sharing, for broader messaging and campaign-oriented activities. There's a great mobile experience. They're really working on the Yammer mobile app and the experience of that embedded Yammer nature within SharePoint pages, and a lot that they're doing with Teams to more fully integrate the Yammer tab experience, and certainly moving out into other environments in a more protected fashion. That they announced the data residency in the EU is a big one, and certainly the sovereign nature of that. This is a little bit more of a direct view of the announcements that they made, in addition to the recent announcement of live events starting to move into targeted release. Live events being a big one that Dave was picking up on. If you have an event and you want to manage it in a really nice way, you can do that through Yammer, leveraging Stream, SharePoint, and Yammer as the solution. And then you have that asset that's a great on-demand experience. You can still ask questions, and it will all get, in the future, it'll all get crawled and a lot more easy to discover. And then Kaizala, if you don't know what Kaizala is, it's a new chat experience that's really based on a broader outreach to external people as you're working with either small companies that have very few unique employees, but they're working with a very large vendor pool or direct with their clients. It just takes a phone number similar to other chat experiences, but then it has this rich experience of how you can then manage and hold that conversation, the experience within the app. And the big thing that they've announced is this is really all to be accrued into value into the future of being Teams features. So there is a lot in terms of where it's headed. Where it's at now, it certainly is a standalone application, but the big investment is how this will roll into Teams. So off of that, any last thoughts on those last couple things, or moving on to you to share the next topic?
I think we'll go to the next topic because way too much stuff to cover. So before I do that, while all the people are listening, can I get you, because we've done such a great job, you've done such a great job with the roadmap, can I get you to come back to talk about home sites and maybe a few other details, and we'll schedule that at your leisure in the next few weeks?
Sure.
All right, good. It's recorded. I told you that, right? We do have some questions too, so we'll try to get to those. I think that was valuable. Please let us know in the chat. That was really fantastic. But with that, I always judge, and why it's in the bottom here, I always judge by how full the cafeteria is. As you can see here, the cafeteria was like completely full. So there were a lot of people, not overwhelming like Ignite when it's 30,000 of your friends and there are like 3 different cafeterias to eat in. I don't know actually, and plus some. Okay, maybe my cell phone pictures aren't that great. We unfortunately had to move the party inside, but you can see all those bodies. It was packed, and on the top right was the keynote that you can read on the virtual summit. So Dave, tell me, how was the crowd? And if the people who didn't attend want to advocate, to their managers to go, who do you think should go to the SharePoint conference?
Yeah, so probably my immediate feedback is that I've attended the SPC a few years in a row now, and I think this was the largest number of kind of like 301 level resources I've seen Microsoft provide in a long time. So if you've got engineers or folks that want to get into the weeds on implementation or upgrade, migration, customization for SharePoint Online or any of these other services, this was sort of the deepest that I've seen us have available in any of the conferences previously. So Microsoft brought an excellent presence, and I would probably say, this was a large crowd, but bring more tech folks next year because they had the resources there to sort of get into those deeper issues and challenges to kind of help you solve and understand what those challenges are going to be going forward and how to fix them.
Yeah, I think they scheduled the sessions really well, and I will take this opportunity to say, yes, you're right, Dave, that they limited the amount of sessions that Mark presented at. So that's no, but the first sessions were the introductory, the high level setting, the context, which is what Mark does really well, and then the deep dives all the way to the 4 days was fantastic, and some of the questions that are being asked here we might not get to because they are very good, but they're deeper ones. So we will find those answers and post them on a blog later. For me, I agree. I remember 2009, 2012 when I spoke last, and that's partially because it didn't exist after that. what a great crowd. There to learn, really flowed nicely. And that comes from someone who attends conferences often. It's not the race. I truly do believe IT managers and IT pros with broader responsibilities, Ignite is the place to be because you can get everything at one conference. If you're mostly focused on SharePoint, this is fantastic and realigning the heritage. And while there are other conferences too that have great speakers, I do agree with Dave that the Microsoft presence, hopefully we're putting guilt on Mark here, was great. So Mark, who is this designed for, and how do you think it went this year?
Yeah, when we think about the different sessions that we're going to have, obviously the speakers that submit and get accepted and come, the overall experience is designed for anybody that has interest in SharePoint. So there are sessions always for IT pros, always for developers, and since a couple of years ago, a lot more sessions for the business user. We really like to start day one, of course, with the big announcements and the overview of, hey, if you haven't seen some of these technologies across the different workloads, we want to make sure you know what they are today in production, and then quickly move into, of course, all the announcements. But then day 2 and 3, or if it's a longer conference, day 4, we have all the sessions that go into the actual practical how. So how, if I'm an IT pro, do I roll out and deploy my modern intranet? How do I deploy OneDrive? What does it mean to bring Yammer into a portal experience? There are sessions, on everything. For developers, just simple ones, how to develop your first SharePoint framework web part, all the way up to how can I develop custom solutions that are rich, tapping into back-end resources and with the unique user experience. So we really do target the conference for anybody across those main personas. And I thought this year we did a really nice job to balance it out. Feedback that we've either already seen, live feedback, or that's coming in based on what people liked or would like to do differently. We're seeing a good mix of what people thought in terms of the sessions. There's a lot of, obviously, if you want to come and get a richer, deeper dive into certain topics, the different workshops, there were 2 days of workshops before and 1 day after that were well attended, certainly across a lot of different personas and technologies. I led one for the OneDrive, where we really focused on sort of from OneDrive 101 to a rich set of a couple hours focused on just deployment of the sync client and the rollout and adoption experience for end users. And we had about 65 people or 60-ish people that were deeply engaged, and the feedback that we got was that it was helpful, and I heard that across all the different workshops. So I'm certainly the biased one that's giving you my opinion, but to be frank, we certainly saw a great crowd, great interest, a lot of interest online. Of course, we had made sure that we broadcasted the keynote as the SharePoint Virtual Summit, and I'll turn to that here in a couple minutes just to show you some of those resources. But we made a lot of announcements. We hope they landed well. We're getting feedback on things that were a little unclear, but most of it landed well, and people were really pleased with what we announced, and certainly pleased with the direction that we've been going and continue to go.
Fantastic. So let me just go here, and actually we'll talk about that in a new webinar. I think we've talked about that. So let me cover 2 minutes of questions, and then we can end with Mark sharing out those resources.
Yeah, and Adam, I'm going to override just 2 things, because if everybody stayed this long, got to see 2 demos, and then we'll turn to the thing. Not to override the next webinar. I certainly still sign up to go deeper, but we got him queued up here, and I know one of the questions that we'll address is specific about the site rename, so that might be.
Oh, great. Okay, good point. So, so stay on. Apologize for us going over, but I think the information. Let me just look real here to see a question about product teaching moments. So the little blue bubbles that pop up across the screen, making sure you. I know this is not the official word, but you know what you're doing, or trying to be helpful and guide you to the next step. So that's a in-product teaching moment.
Yeah, internally we call those coach marks, but externally they are just teaching tips that appear either on first run or when you get new ownership of a new site, if you're first-time site owner. Obviously, throughout the products with OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams, there's a lot of things to guide people to what's new or what you might be trying to do next, in addition to a contextual help experience that starts to learn more and more over time what you've done, what you're trying to accomplish, and point you to those right resources.
Great. And speaking of resources, when you do show the resources for the virtual summit, a great question about deeper insights into the capabilities that are being rolled out. Their example was, location column. They know it's there, but how do you find the deeper information? So if you could go on that.
Sure.
The blogs, always now go to techcommunity.microsoft.com to see all of the latest announcements, but I think you'll be showing the grouping of all of the blogs that came out on SPC.
Yep.
Someone has a bet that Kaizala will get a new name, and you do not have to make a comment about that, but I personally will not bet against that. So apologize for those running over their lunch hour, but I think these are going to be great demos.
So we've got 4 minutes, and I want to first address the site rename, at least the question that Steve had. And Steve was asking about the site rename feels like it's going to kill the governance plan. And this is certainly something that is only available to your SharePoint admin. This is not something that a site owner can do. It would have to be a request by the site owner, but that they can then do that from the SharePoint admin experience. And certainly, so IT is in control. I'll have to ask my peers if it's something that you can not have available. But certainly there's a lot of value. Not only can you change the site rename, it really is the URL. A site owner can change the actual name of the site for how it appears, but the URL is really the focus of the feature. When you do it, all assets still redirect. So if somebody has an old link in an email or something that was shared in a chat, when they click it, it will redirect them to the new URL based on the old URL structure. But first, to show the resources, if you go into your browser and type in microsoft.com/SPVS for SharePoint Virtual Summit, as you can see here, it'll take you to this page, which we've dedicated to have a few things for you. This is the replay of the full keynote. So this is an hour and a half of all the new announcements and tons of demos and lots of great speakers sharing what it is that we're working on. That's headed off with Seth Patton, who is our General Manager in Marketing, and of course Jeff Teeper, CVP in the engineering world. And as you scroll down the page, you'll see that you can go to learn about all the announcements from a blog perspective, what Adam mentioned. If you go here, it'll start you off on the parent blog, which Jeff authored, and then there are links to all of the sub-blogs for all the different workloads, most of which we covered when you looked at the different categories of roadmap, but in lots of detail, lots of screenshots, GIFs, and of course information in depth, like Adam was saying about what is the specific feature, what can I expect from it. Think about these blogs, though, just to be clear, they are just disclosure blogs, and they do have some timing information, but they're not announcing any release. It's more of here's what we announced and disclosed as things we're working on, but a lot of great information. If you have time to read this week or next, definitely set aside some time to read through a couple of blogs of interest. As you go down, you'll see that we're actually starting up a new newsletter that you can sign up for. That's coming directly from the Microsoft 365 marketing team, specific to all of what we're doing for teamwork and employee engagement. A couple of customer stories, and then a few of our sessions were actually recorded and will be soon online. And you can see the collection of which ones they were. Primarily, there are overview sessions about the different workloads. And then certainly lots of information as we learn what are people looking for specific to the SharePoint conference. We'll put them here. But the couple things that I wanted to show, and I've got 1 minute, so I'm going to show them really quickly and then we'll show them in depth in the future. This is what we announced around a SharePoint home site, and where you're looking at here is I'm at the root site of this tenant, so tenantname.sharepoint.com. This is where I want all eyeballs to go in the company, and I want it to be a great dynamic experience. It has 3 things that you're seeing here. You've got a great way to navigate across different sites and portals, whether they're team sites, communication sites, other hub sites. It's just links to navigate using the mega menu. I have full control to edit the experience, but really what you're looking at is what we're intending to be the day 1 experience. We now have vertical columns, and we've got a lot of great personalized experiences alongside news, videos, Yammer conversations. Everything on the right rail by default is specific to the user. So when you sign in, you see your documents, your frequent sites, recommendations for different articles and pages and content for you. That's the thing that makes it the most dynamic. And on the left-hand side are elements that are curated for you, news for everyone, the organization news, audience targeting, those kinds of things come into play. So this is a unique experience for whomever's logged in. And by the way, it looks great on mobile. It's easy to edit. It's easy to contribute. There are other things that are coming to make this a much more easy to manage experience with scheduling. And of course, like we mentioned, ghost authoring so people can work on content but publish as another. And all the while, you can control these pages, list and label them with the right metadata, all that good stuff. When you click into My SharePoint, it actually takes you to what we call SharePoint Home today. But My SharePoint is going to be a part of a SharePoint Home site that again takes you into this richer view of all of the news that's specifically tailored to you based on who you work with, items that you're publishing, and the news that you're consuming from sites that you're active in. And of course, the pivot of sites that you frequent, you follow, recent, things that are being suggested to you, and on down the while, a much more rich view, a broader view of items that are featured for everyone, your recent documents literally across all of your activity, and items that you've saved, whether it's a news article or a document. When you save it for later, it'll appear here in the SharePoint Home, what is now called the My SharePoint Experience, part of SharePoint Home sites. We talked real briefly about SharePoint Search. You can see that here. This is now at the parent level of the Microsoft 365 toolbar, and it is something that from SharePoint you are expected to do an enterprise-wide search, either to get back to the things you were most recently doing or to do something and commit to a full search by typing in a keyword and hitting return. OneDrive, real quickly, that recommended experience, that access to get into those files that are stored in your shared libraries and have this be a really rich experience, even with column formatting, required details. If this were something where I wanted to pin an item to the top, I simply select it, and contextually you can see there's a lot that I can do. I can save that item for later. I can pin it to the top so it'll appear here for everybody, and you get a sense that even from the OneDrive user experience, I can manage those shared libraries. But the last thing is to talk about site rename. So to be very transparent, I've now transitioned over to the SharePoint admin experience. So I have to be a SharePoint admin, and there's this SPC19 Go site that I created, and you can see all of its properties here on the right-hand side, in addition to the site URL. So if I wanted to go and edit that, for the sake of time, I'm going to kind of pause on this one, but this is where you would go to rename it. And I'm going to just quickly refresh here and get back to where I was before so that hopefully I can show you this. If not, I'll explain it in detail. This is the first time that I've tried to demo this outside of SharePoint Conference. And so if I go into SPC, Go, and go into the information pane, and right here I should have the ability to edit, but I apologize, it's now not showing for me. The context would be that if I were to rename it, you of course would see the rename here within the URL, and even if I had an asset like this this news article, which you can see of course has the old URL structure from when it was created, if I hit return, it would resolve to the what I was going to type in, SPC20. But Adam, I'll end here because unfortunately I don't want to end on a failed demo, but it's really exciting to just be able to do it right in line as a SharePoint admin to do what a lot of people request is I've changed the name of my project, or our now campaign has changed names, and we want the URL to reflect that. But with that, we'll save that juice for later, and I'll transition to close out. And thanks for giving me these last couple minutes.
Thank you for doing that so speedily. Dave, I'll give you the final word. Thank you all for staying for the few extra minutes of great demonstration, and we will go into a little more depth of home sites and maybe a few other things about OneDrive in a different webinar. Dave, any last words?
Yeah, no, I'm just happy to get a chance to have everyone join in and listen to some of the early things. As you can see, the conference was so loaded with information, we couldn't even scope out a a meeting to touch on all of it. I know there's a ton left to sort of discuss, so look forward to having everyone back if we're able to set up another meeting and continue to talk about some of these great categories and all the exciting stuff coming out of Microsoft around SharePoint Online and Office 365.
Fantastic. And I will just say thank you, Dave, and thank you, Mark, for being on today. And everyone else, have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.